United with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors, serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation of Life Christian Broadcasting Television. And now, United with Christ.
Blessings, everyone. I am Pastor Jeanette Santana from Centro Apostolico de El Paso, also known as CADEP, where we are called to help people discover their purpose and unleash the seed of potential that God has placed inside of them. Once again, so grateful for the opportunity to be hosting during these couple of weeks this program, United with Christ. And once again, with my dear Solema, our youth pastor. And if you were with us last week, if you remember some of the things that were shared last week, she's an amazing testimony. She's a living proof of how we should react and what to do when we are going through so many fiery trials. She shared with us last week how she was molested as a young girl. And even though she was intimidated by the aggressor not to tell anything because she was threatened that something bad will happen to other people around her, she was able to thrive as a young girl in school, to be successful. She married, she got pregnant, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer, and her baby had no opportunity, by the words of the doctors, to survive. And now that baby that was not supposed to survive, it's a beautiful 15-year-old young lady, Camila. And after going through all those fiery trials and remembering the scripture we read last week in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 through 7, the trials that come to test our faith, we can think that after everything she went through, she came out victorious and she lived happily ever after. That's what we could think. But today, in this second part of the testimony, we will hear what happened after her baby Camila was born, an expected baby, a baby that survived all the prognosis of the doctors. This was supposed to be a very joyful moment, a new baby at home. Everything is joyful. She survived abuse. She survived being molested. Now she has her baby. And as I said a couple of seconds ago, did she really live happily ever after? Although things happened. And today, I would like Zulema to share with us what happened next in her life.
Thank you for having me again in United with Christ. So yes, I had my daughter. When she was 3 weeks old, she started having seizures, and she was diagnosed with epilepsy. It was a struggle, a lot of days in the hospital, a lot of nights in the hospital. 3 months after struggling with the situation with Camila, we had a very, very, very tragic situation in our family. My whole family, I'm talking about generations of family, grandma, cousins, uncles, aunts, everybody went on a camping day. I myself didn't go because I had been in the hospital with Camila the day before. And amongst those was my mom, my brother, and my sister. My sister at the time was 7 years old. And it was supposed to be a joyous day. My family was in from out of town, and it was a wonderful time. As a matter of fact, there was even baptisms taking place that day and that camping day. And around 7 p.m. on that 15th of August of 2009, I'm never going to forget, we received a phone call. My husband and I received a phone call stating that they couldn't find my sister. And we quickly drove out to where they were gathered. When we get there, there's a lot of law enforcement, Border Patrol, police officers, Coast Guard, just a lot of law enforcement. And she had already been missing for several hours. I get there and my mom is in desperation, crying out for her baby daughter. That was my baby sister. After hours and hours and hours of search, and the search was very, very intensive. I clearly remember 2 scuba diving teams. They were at a river, not too far away from here. And on one side, there is a waterfall, and on the other side, there is a fence that goes all the way down to gather trash, etc., so that it doesn't flow down the river, because that connects into the Rio Grande. And the scuba diving team, 2 teams, one on this side, one on this side, they go up, down, me in the middle. Multiple times, finally they say she's not in the water. We don't know where she's at. They start evacuating everyone, checking vehicles, there's search dogs, etc. There's an Amber Alert released. And around 11, a little bit before 11, my mom throws herself on the floor and she lifts up her arms up to heaven and she says, God, only you could guide them. With your light, show them where Lisha, which was my sister's name, is. For whatever reason, the scuba diving team decides to go back into the water. In a matter of 5 minutes, they find her. And so sure enough, she was in the water. And I'm sorry I get a little choky, but it was a very tragic situation. So my sister had drowned. It was very difficult on my mom. Very, very difficult on my mom. And to lose a child, for those of you that have lost a child, it can't be compared to anything. And so to see my mom in that situation, being the oldest, I had to pull it together, hold it together. More than ever, I had to hold on to God's word. I was in shock. There was a lot going on in my mind, but I knew I had to be voice of reason in that moment for my mom because she needed me. And I knew that I had to clothe myself with every word that God has spoken, not over myself, but over my family. We had to do funeral arrangements, and when I say we, it was me. I had to plan funeral arrangements. It was just so much in such short time. And I'm going to be very honest, I did question God. I did ask God, why did you allow this to happen? And I look back and I feel like God wasn't mad at me for asking him and questioning him. Mm-hmm. Have I received all the answers? Absolutely not. But I've received his peace and his comfort, and so has my mom. My mom, if you think I'm a testimony, my mom is an even stronger testimony of resilience.
Definitely, I can witness that. Her mom, it's part of our congregation as well. And I don't know how tall is your mom, but she's not so tall in the physical, but that woman, it's a giant of faith. Because if you see these women here sharing how she has gone through so many fiery trials, and today she's sitting here and she is pastoring teenagers and young adults and speaking to them about the love of God, about the power of the faith. Her mom, I have no words to describe that powerful woman.
Yes, she is a powerful woman. And I want to read the scripture, Romans 12:12. It says, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. And this was definitely a tribulation. But if I could say one thing, my mom, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the first 6 months was very difficult. She couldn't work. We had to take care of her. It was a very difficult time. And I was scared. I was scared for her. I was scared that, you know, in that moment that she would try to do something to herself. But little did I know that in those quiet moments of crying, of her saying, I don't want to be with anybody, it's because she was spending that time with the Lord and she was in constant prayer. And so that took quite some time to overcome. God was so good in the midst of all of that. Obviously, nobody prepares for the death of a 7-year-old. We didn't have any money. The incident happened in New Mexico, so her body had to be taken to Albuquerque to the coroner for the autopsy, just so many things. And that's very costly to transport a body. They charge you per mile. But God is so, so good. And I don't get tired of saying this. People have asked me, how could you love God so much? Look at everything that you've been through. Well, in the midst of all of this, God put in a man's heart, not just one man, a lot of people gathered together and they provided. But there was one particular man and he wanted to meet with me. I met with him. I went to his business. He's like, tell me what happened. I shared with him. And I want to say something. Let's not be so quick to criticize, because maybe you're thinking, oh, well, they weren't taking care of her. She drowned. Where was the mom? Where was the family? If everybody was there. God works in mysterious ways. And I could tell you that the water where they found her and where she drowned, they even though they had baptisms, they had a really hard time doing the baptisms because the water was no more than a foot high.
Very shallow.
Very shallow. Very, very shallow. So I just want to encourage us all to not be so quick to judge, to not be so quick to condemn, because we don't know what we don't know. And so this man, he's like, tell me the story. I share with him what happened. If I told you the whole story, we would be here for hours and hours and hours. So I'm going to keep it short. But he called his son and he asked me, how much do you need for the funeral? Everything. And I was like, we need this amount. It was almost $10,000. He calls his son. Originally, he had given me a check for $500. He takes the check away from me for $500. And at first I was like, is he regretting helping us? Did I say something wrong? And then he calls his son and he's like, give her a check for $10,000. He covered all of the funeral cost. And everything else that was collected allowed me to take care of my mom, pay her bills, etc., while she didn't work, because she didn't work for about 8 months. And so in the midst of it all, I can assure you, even though it doesn't seem like God is working, he is working. There's that song that says, healer, deliverer, etc. Yes, he is all of those things. And when it seems like he's quiet, he is working.
Yeah, and another song came to my mind, because sometimes it's so easy for us when we are in church and the music is going, the worship team is on fire, and we start singing. Even when I don't see it, you're working. But one thing is singing that when, honestly speaking, nothing is happening in our lives that can compare to what your family went through. But God really is the God that works in the midst of our worst moments, our fiery trials, and even when we don't see, he's working. And when you were speaking, it's so hard for me to believe when I see everything she has gone through, how easy it's for some people to turn their backs on God when things that can barely compare to what they went through happen to them.
I think that we realized and we knew that the only thing we could do was hold on to God. It was the only way out. It was the only way to keep sane, to keep sanity, to move forward, and we did, and we did. And I know I said this last time, but beauty always comes out of ashes when you trust in Him. And so we were able to overcome the loss. Do we miss her? Absolutely. We just had an anniversary, of her passing, 15 years of her passing.
It was yesterday, right?
The 15th yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes. And if you saw my mom, you wouldn't believe that she's been through what she's been through, or that we've been through what we've been through, because her faith is so strong, and she keeps pushing through. And we have a good example in our pastor and in our spiritual home, and most importantly in his word. And so we're overcoming that loss, and everything seems to be great. As great as it could be, right, after losing a loved one. And exactly 3 days later, I remember that anniversary, that third anniversary. My mom was just in such a sadness, and she couldn't describe it. And I told her, Mom, it's normal, it's her anniversary, it's normal. And she kept on saying, no, there's just something, I can't describe it, there's something. So 3 days later, August 18th, of 2012, I don't receive a phone call, I receive a visit by a police officer at our doorstep. And he's there and he asks, who's here? And we were like, oh, well, I mentioned everybody that was at the house. And he's like, do you have a brother? And I said, yes. Did he do something? Is he okay? And he said, I can't give you a lot of information, but you need to go to the hospital. And I entered into somewhat of a panic mode, but I kept it together because that's what I do, keep it together. By God's grace, not my grace, not my strength, but by His grace and His strength. And I call my mom and I tell her, I need you to get up, I need you to get ready. She's like, what happened? It's in the middle of the night. And I was like, or Eddie called me, that was my brother's name, and he's in the hospital. And she's like, what happened? Tell me the truth. And at this moment, I don't know the whole truth. All I know is that a police officer showed up at my doorstep and said, you need to rush to the hospital. I pick up my mom. We get to the hospital. They take us into a empty, lonely, small room. 2 doctors come in, and they say, they verify that we are who we say we are. There's a police officer right outside the door. And they say, your brother has been hit by a drunk driver. We went in surgically, but unfortunately, he's brain dead. They had gone in surgically. My mom loses it again for a second time, 3 years, 3 days later. I see the exact same scene that I saw when they found my sister, and she loses it. And when I say she loses it. You have to understand she's already lost 1 child. This is the 2nd child. And the doctors try to restrain her. They bring in nurses. And I was like, you don't understand. This is the 2nd child she loses. And they're trying to control her, so they had to sedate her. And I was in shock. I remember clearly I couldn't really cry. And they said, if you keep your calm, we're going to let you see him. I was like, okay. So they take my mom to a room, and they take me to another room. And my brother's there. He's laying there. His head is bandaged. He's already in the hospital robe. And I remember going up to him and whispering in his ear, and I said, if you're in the presence of God, I understand why you wouldn't want to let go. But if you have a fight in you, fight. And there was nothing left to do. My brother wanted to be an organ donor, and so we respected his wishes. So we spent several days in the hospital. He was connected, and that prolonged the letting go. Because we still saw his heart beating. We still saw his chest moving up and down. His body was still doing what it should be doing, except that his eyes never opened up. And in that process, my mom would try to open up his eyes, and she would pray and pray and pray and pray. And we believed for a miracle till the very end. Finally, my mom was like, nope, I don't believe that he's gone. Look at him. And so to prove to us that he was gone, they disconnected everything briefly. Briefly, because there was donors waiting to receive his organs. The recipients, I'm sorry. And sure enough, they disconnect him. Everything flatlines. They bring him back up quickly. The following day, we get notice. There's a recipient for the heart, for the lungs, for the kidneys, for everything, because everything was intact except for his head. And the day came where he had to be disconnected. And he was disconnected, and it's very hard. Very hard. And again, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. It's so easy to say it, and it's so easy to repeat the words, but it's hard to live it, Pastor Jeanette. It's hard. It's hard to live it. It's hard to walk it through. To walk through the words, because sometimes we repeat words, right? Like on the cell phone, I use this example a lot. The cell phone already knows your language, and it automatically fills in the words.
Yes.
And so we have the same reaction, right? Something happens, and we start releasing the word, but a lot of times we do it without even knowing and living.
Not having like a true revelation of what that word it's doing in us or should do in us. That's why we need to walk in that word. That the word of the Lord, it's that like a two-edged sword that will penetrate up to our bone marrow and will do it work. Not just vain word repeating, because if not, you wouldn't be here sharing that story like you're sharing it.
Yeah, it was hard. And that loss was particularly hard because it came with a trial for the young man that hit my brother. He was a young soldier, also 22 years old. My brother was 22 years old when he passed away. And so the trial prolonged the healing, is what it seemed like. Sadly, but, we believe in a just God. And I say sadly because we see the situation repeated time and time again. The young man got a slap in the hand. He served 3 months in prison and was released to probation for 3 years. That was the punishment. Man's punishment, at least. And I'm not saying, please don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying I wish anything bad on him. Mm-hmm. The last day of the trial, we were given an opportunity as a family to speak to him. And my brother, when he passed away, he had a 2-week-old baby. And this young man had a 2-month-old baby the day of the accident. Same age, they both had just new dads. And they asked if anybody in the family wanted to share anything, and of course, nobody could. It was too emotional. And I prayed about it, and God gave me a word, not for us, for the family, but for this young man. And I remember God said, tell him you forgive him, and truly forgive him. And I was like, God, you're asking for a little bit too much. I don't know if I'm ready for that. And he said, daughter, I'm going to heal you. Just forgive him. I sat in front of him at the end of that trial, and I said, I hope you've learned your lesson, because he was going to get to walk away, basically. And that the story doesn't repeat again, not just for the sake of our family, but for your family and for other families. And I said, and I want you to know that I do forgive you. I do forgive you. And I wish nothing but the best for you, and I hope that you have a true encounter with Christ. And that he heals this wound, because I know that you're hurting. Maybe not as much as we're hurting, but you and your family are hurting. Among many other things. And after that trial finishes, people involved in the trial, detectives, police officers, crime victims, assistants, etc., they all came up to me and they said, we've never heard anybody with such a sincere words of forgiveness. How did you do it? And I was like, it wasn't me, it was God. I think that God wanted him to know that not only had we forgiven him, but that he was forgiving him. And so that's that chapter. It took, again, my mom stopped working for several months. She did go into a depression, but in the midst of the depression and the anxiety, I could honestly sit here and tell you, she never stopped praying. She never stopped praying. She didn't even stop going to church. The day after we go to the hospital, that was a Saturday night, that Sunday morning, she said, we're going to church. We showed up at church with whatever we showed up in the hospital.
After hearing this, we have no words. I've been able to listen to this testimony for I don't know how many times, and it never ceases to impact me, because once again, you can think after everything she went through and her mom went through, they live happily ever after. Not so long ago, a couple of years ago, I always say that, and now I'm the one that says, excuse me if I choke, but as a pastor, one of the most difficult moments I can recall, it's the moment I had to sit down with her and her mom in my office and look at her mom and tell her, Lucy, Zulema has been diagnosed with cancer. And I will never forget that woman's look And the only thing she said at that moment was, "This is the only child I have left. This is the only child I have left." As you can see, she's a survivor. What a survivor. What a fighter. She's here with us. But not only being a survivor of a disease or the attacks on her body, but a survivor in the faith, because many can survive the trials, the diseases, the losses, but they lose the faith and they end up leaving God, turning their back on God. So we're almost ready to finish. Zulema, one final word on how important it is to forgive and to not cease praying, and then pray over the people in this last minute we have.
Again, I'm going to tell you again, don't give up. Keep pushing through. Forgiveness, it truly is not for the other person. It truly is for you. And it truly sets you free. That's why God says, forgive time and time again. How many times shall we forgive? 7 times 77, right? And so forgive time again. So I want to pray for all of you, and that if you're in the middle of a situation where you've lost a loved one, a divorce, the loss of a job, whatever that situation may be, I just encourage you and invite you to hold on to the hand of God and allow Him to take you through this step,
Yes, Father.
through this path, through this walk. And I just want to declare a word of healing and of blessing over your lives, and know that God sees your every tear. God holds your every tear in His hand, and He hears your every prayer. And even though it may seem like He is not working because He is silent, He is working, and He's working in your favor. So be blessed and continue to be united with Christ.